So in 1990, Bette Midler released an album entitled Some People's Lives. I know that a lot of you have probably been listening to that album this week, right? But there was a song in particular in that album that has stuck out to me ever since high school. It became popular enough so that the bus driver that would take us to school every day always seemed to have it on. And the name of the song was called From a Distance. And I want you to listen to a portion of the lyrics from the song. It says this: "From a distance, we are instruments marching in a common band, playing songs of hope, playing songs of peace. They're the songs of every man. God is watching us. God is watching us. God is watching us from a distance." And this was during the time, I think the Gulf War was happening at the time, so there's a lot of unrest and uncertainty in our world. And so this song was kind of like the warm fuzzies, and you could hear it on secular radio, and everybody, loved it. It talked about God, and so, kind of even gave Christians the warm fuzzies because, God is watching us after all. And, it's from a distance, and everything was good, and all that kind of good stuff. But the song is basically saying that God started the world in motion, but once he did that, he's just kind of up in heaven watching us do our thing. He doesn't intervene. He doesn't get involved. He just puts stuff in motion and is just a spectator watching all of us do our thing. And I think if we all sat in a theology class and just spent a little time in the scriptures, we'd all come to the conclusion that's not 100% right? So God is above us, that is true, but he's actively involved in our lives too. But I wonder if sometimes, practically speaking, consciously or subconsciously, we buy into the theme of that song. How often do we think God is actively involved in our lives and in this world? Do you think that he kind of is involved on a monthly basis? Maybe once a month he does something that he's kind of involved in us, in our lives and stuff like that. Or maybe you're oh no, I think maybe it could be as much as weekly, maybe a couple times a week, or maybe even daily. Or do you feel like he's just watching from a distance? I would suggest to you that what you believe about this has a significant impact on how you will live. And so I want to have a discussion about that this morning in our time together. Now, if you weren't able to be here last week, I just want you to let you know, my name's Neal. I'm the campus pastor here at the Church of Hebron. So glad you're with us. We started a teaching series called Experiencing God. And last week, we really kind of wanted to drill down on the definition of what experiencing God is. And so it's easy for us to think experiencing God is this overly emotional thing or this mystical thing. As I described it last week, it's a little bit like Pam Beasley in the episode of The Office where she says, "I feel God in this Chili's." And so I think sometimes we kind of think that way, that we think that's what experiencing God is like. And so here's a good working definition of experiencing God. To experience God is to enjoy a relationship with the Creator God who reveals himself to us and invites us to join him in his mission through our obedience. So one more time, just to kind of get it fresh in our minds. To experience God is to enjoy a relationship with the Creator God who reveals himself to us and invites us to join him in his mission through our obedience. And so last week we looked at the definition. This week, I want to kind of steer our minds toward one specific truth that I think has the power to unlock how we approach this entire subject. And so here's the specific truth. God is always at work around us and in us. God is always at work around us and in us. For a variety of reasons, I think we get tempted to think that unless there is something really outwardly amazing happening in our lives, that God isn't actually at work. If God doesn't answer a really big prayer, if someone didn't make a really, really big spiritual decision, or if someone isn't delivered from a deeply oppressive sin, then God's really not at work. That's, I think, how we can kind of look at God and our relationship with him and what God's doing in this world. While God is certainly at work in those above examples, he's also at work around us and in us in a lot of moments when we don't notice him and when we don't necessarily see him. And so we're going to go to Philippians chapters 1 and 2 this morning and kind of look at a few verses there. Before we get there, though, I want to give you 5 observations that I think will be helpful for us as we think about this topic and about what Philippians 1 and 2 says. Number 1, just because you can't see God at work doesn't mean he isn't at work. Like, I think sometimes we get a little reliant on our abilities to see and know everything. But God alone is actually the all-knowing and all-seeing one. And we have to allow for the fact that God is doing great things. We just can't simply see them. And so that's a first observation I think that we need to kind of help ourselves work through. The second one is similar. In hindsight, we see God at work much more often than in the moment. Okay, so like how many times have you looked back on a set of circumstances or situations in your life and you said something like, wow, look at the way that God worked in that moment. And like, you're really impressed at the hand of God in that situation. But in the moment, you were like, where's God? Like, what's he doing? Because you couldn't see it in the moment. What we can't see in real time, we're really good at seeing in hindsight. The problem is we live in real time. So we have to kind of remind ourselves about, okay, in the past, I've seen things where I didn't see things in the moment, but I can now look back and see that God was at work. And I have to remind myself continually that's true probably of things in my life at the present moment, even if I can't see them. 3, most of the time when God is at work, he works behind the scenes before he makes things visible. Whether we kind of look at this in terms of the proverbial iceberg, like we see a tip of the iceberg, but there's really a lot more underneath, or we think of the internal organs of our bodies, or even just physically working out. Like, there are certain environments where we kind of accept this to be true, that there's a lot of progress being made without it really being seen. But for whatever reason, in the spiritual realm, we tend not to think that. We tend to do everything we can to go, oh, well, I mean, if I can't see it, there's nothing spiritually significant happening. But these other illustrations serve as a reminder to us that that is not necessarily true. And God works underneath the surface a lot of times before he makes things visible in our lives. Number 4, God is always accomplishing his mission, but we often lack the ability to see his mission work because we don't understand the whole picture. So sometimes, or a lot of times, God's work accomplishing his mission doesn't feel or seem like it's good or right or connected to us. But this is because we don't always know and see what is good and connected. How many times have we looked at and seen random encounters only to see God put the dots together later on down the road? And so we get discouraged in those moments because we're like, well, God's not doing anything. I can't see his mission. He's just not doing what he said he's going to be doing. But then we realize, oh, okay, he's putting stuff together. And it's just because we can't see the whole picture. And number 5, and this one maybe summarizes all the other ones together, at least in terms of our response to it. Faith in God acknowledges that we don't need the whole picture in order to believe this truth and in order to trust in who he is. This is a piece that we're going to talk about often in this Experiencing God study. But it needs to be said right now, too. Not only should we cooperate with God when we don't see how circumstances are contributing to his mission, but we should go one step further and trust him as well. So I can look at a situation in a moment that feels random, it feels like God's not working, and I can go, okay, well, I'm going to cooperate with God because, I have to. Like, it's what God calls me to do. Or I could take it one step further and go, I'm not only going to cooperate because I have to, but I'm going to cooperate because I know and I trust that God's got my best in mind, and he's going to execute what I've seen him do 1,000 times before. And it helps us, and this is where it radically shifts the way that we live, and so that we end up living more joyful lives. Psalm 84, verse 12, Lord Almighty, blessed is the one who trusts in you. Like, there's joy and there's blessing in simply trusting in the Lord in response to what he's doing in this world, even if we don't always see it. And so that's important for us to understand. Okay, so those 5 things, I wanted to get those out there before we got to Philippians chapter 1. Ultimately, trust in the Lord is built on the character and reputation of God, not on our visible situations or our individual skills and abilities. And maybe that'll be helpful for us as we think about trusting the Lord. Trust is built on the character and reputation of God, not on our visible situation or our individual skills and abilities. So we don't just trust God when things are progressing well as we feel like they should be progressing. We trust God when things are not progressing well as we feel like they should be progressing, because our trust is built on the character and reputation of God, not on our circumstances. And we don't just trust God when our skills and abilities allow us to thrive in this world, but we trust God when our skills and abilities are well below what we need to thrive, because our trust is built on the character and reputation of our God, not on our skills and abilities. And so when Psalm 84 calls us to trust him, even when we don't understand what's happening, even when we don't see things, this is part of what it means to experience God, and we will experience joy and happiness and blessing just simply on the fact that we are trusting in him. Now, to our text for this morning, Philippians chapter 1. I want to read verses 3 to 6. There's obviously a lot here in these 2 chapters. I'm going to start with Philippians 1. I want to read verses 3 to 6. God is always at work around us and in us. And I want us to see from this text some specific truths around that. Philippians 1, 3 to 6, here's what it says. I thank my God every time I remember you. I probably should back up and say this. This is Paul talking to the church at Philippi. Believers. He's writing to them. Individuals that he has a vested interest in. He says, I thank my God every time I remember you, in all my prayers for all of you. And I always pray with joy because of your partnership in the gospel from the first day until now, being confident of this, and notice what he says here, being confident of this, that he who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion until the day of Christ Jesus. So there are 2 things that I think are worth mentioning. Well, there's a lot of things that are worth mentioning, but for purposes of this text, and for this talk, I should say, 2 things that are worth mentioning. Number 1, prayer in this moment helps us to see the mission and work of God. You see it in the text with Paul. Paul prayed, and God aligned his thoughts and his vision to the mission of God. It doesn't necessarily mean that you and I can't see God's mission and God's work without prayer, but when we go to the Lord in prayer, God has a way of not only changing circumstances in our lives, answering prayer through meeting needs, but he also changes us in that moment. And when he changes us, part of what he does is he aligns our focus to see the mission and work that he's actively involved in. It's why when we pray, oftentimes we're like, wow, look at what God is doing. Well, God was already doing that. He just turned your mind and your heart and your focus so you could actually see it. And so prayer has a way of doing that. It helps us to see the mission of God. Second, from the text in that last verse, verse 6, makes it really clear, God is a finishing God. God is a finishing God. He doesn't just start stuff, he finishes it. Some of us here in this room, I think I've talked about this before, some of us in this room are really good at starting stuff, but we don't finish stuff. right? There's like 20 projects in a basement somewhere that are not finished, right? Because we're good at starting but not finishing. All right, let's not be beating each other up until afterwards, okay? Let's give each other some grace. God is a God who is a finishing God. What he starts, he finishes. And part of that is this mission that he has. And part of that revolves around the mission in your life. The spiritual work that God starts in us as people, he will finish. That is, the same thing is true for us collectively as a campus and collectively as a church. What God starts, he finishes. And that's a good word for us. That compels us to experience God in a very refreshing way. Because it's not on me, it's not on you, it's on God. And he'll finish what he starts. We cooperate and we trust. Now, fast forward to Philippians 2, verses 12 to 13. Here's what the text says in that second chapter. Therefore, my dear friends, as you have always obeyed, not only in my presence, but now much more in my absence, continue to work out your salvation with fear and trembling. For it is God who works in you to will and to act in order to fulfill his good purpose. So I see three things that are helpful for us as it relates to the fact that God is always at work in us and around us. Number one, from this text, we have a part to play in God's mission. We see in the text that obedience is actually brought up, which is a part of the definition that we talked about last week. Part of our role that we have to play is to obey God. But we also see that the text actually says to work out our salvation with fear and trembling. Now, that work isn't working for our salvation. It's simply our response to what God has done in our lives. So to work out your salvation is to, in essence, to live a life that shows the truth that you have been saved by grace through faith. And so you're responding to the grace that God has given you. And in that way, you and I are living on mission. We are living out God's mission in this world. Secondly, in the text, we see that God fulfills his purposes through people. And God uses us now to do his work. So his mission is getting accomplished through the cooperation of his people. Now, it's a real joy to be used by God in his mission, in the fulfillment of his mission. We get to be involved in that. We have joy in that process. We are thrilled to be able to do that. He doesn't need to use us. He chooses to use us. And he's using us to fulfill his mission. So this is a great thing. We experience God not just for what we get, but we experience God because we get to be a part of his greater mission. Third, and this relates to that last sentence I just gave you, the mission includes us, but extends well beyond us. The mission includes us, but extends well beyond to us. Our salvation was and is certainly a part of God's mission, but his mission goes way beyond us too. And so what you have received from God, what I have received from God, in his grace and mercy and kindness, is meant to be extended to other people who may not yet have experienced that grace and mercy. And that's really vital for us to see and understand. Because even going back to last week when I talked about the definition, a lot of the times we get sideways about experiencing God because we become consumed about ourselves and what we want to get from God. This is a reminder that God's work is always extending beyond us, that we are a valued part of God's work, but it always extends beyond us. That's the nature of God always being at work. And that's why we as a church, we do the For the One initiative. It's why we're going to be breaking ground and putting another parking lot and putting a kids' play area here and a double gym in our Mount Zion location and a worship center for our students. We do all that not so that we can just add square footage, not so that our property can look nicer. We do that because we are recognizing that God is always at work in us and around us, and that we are individuals who've experienced grace and mercy. We've experienced God, and we want other people to experience God as well. So we're extending that well beyond ourselves. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, I don't know. I would love to think that God is always at work in my life, but my circumstances stink right now. Like, I'm going through a tough situation at work. I might be losing my job, or like there's a relational issue. Like, my marriage is struggling, which actually a good way to help that would be to come to Grace Marriage. It's really helpful. It is really helpful. Or you might be thinking to yourself, I got an issue with a parent or an issue with a child, or I'm not speaking to a friend, or there's a community thing that's going on, and I don't know what to do there. I can't stand my neighbors. My neighbors can't stand. There's all these things you got going on, and you're just struggling. And you're struggling to figure out where God is in all this. And you're like, I just don't know that I can get to this idea that God's always at work in this and around us. There are people in the Bible that felt the exact same way that you feel right now. This is a great thing about the Bible. I mean, it's full of people who these people are in process people every bit as much as you and I are in process. All the way back in the book of Genesis, there's a guy named Joseph. He was one of Jacob's sons. He was actually his favorite son. The text tells us that he was his favorite son. His brothers, and he had many, developed a dislike for Joseph because he was the favored son. So one day, Jacob, who was Joseph's father, sent Joseph out to check on his brothers. His brothers were out in the field and doing their thing, and his brothers used this opportunity to capture him and sell him into slavery. And then they told Dad that he was dead. Well, they didn't actually tell him he was dead. They just, put together a very nice scenario where Dad assumed that he was dead. So Joseph gets sold by his slave traders then to Potiphar. And he serves this guy, Potiphar. He served him well. Potiphar trusted him. He did a great job in Potiphar's house, and Potiphar really appreciated his contribution. But one day, Potiphar's wife tried to seduce Joseph, and Joseph didn't want to do that. He shut her down, and so she claimed foul play on his part. Joseph was then removed from Potiphar's house and sent to prison as a result. Here's a guy that just because he was Dad's favorite, his brothers grabbed him, sold him into slavery, told Dad or implied that he was dead. And then he got sold from the slave traders to this other person's house. He honored this other person, Potiphar, in everything that he did. He was excellent in his work. And then Potiphar's wife tries to seduce him, and he refuses. He does the right thing. And because you notice he's like trying, he continually does the right thing, and he continually ends up in a worse spot. And so now he's in prison. It would be really easy for Joseph to think in that moment, God can't possibly be working here. Right? This is a lot of stuff in his life that wasn't going well. You can think to himself, I've been getting shafted for years and years. So we pick him up in prison. He's in prison. And he became a valuable add there in prison, just like he was in Potiphar's house and just like he was wherever he went. But when an opportunity arises for him to get his freedom, the person who could have helped him totally forgot about him. And you could be thinking in this moment, much like we think Joseph was thinking in this moment, God can't possibly be working in this guy's life. Again, he continues to get the short end of the stick. And then all of a sudden, and we're talking many, many years of this. This isn't like a bad 2 weeks. This is like a bad plenty of years. And then all of a sudden, Pharaoh needs a dream interpreted. Pharaoh, who was the ruler of the land, he needed a dream interpreted. Nobody could do it. And then this guy that forgot about Joseph suddenly remembered, oh, hey, there's this guy in prison. And I think he interpreted a dream for us. You should probably check him out. And so Joseph is brought before Pharaoh. And through God's help, he interprets the dream, and Pharaoh rewards him by making him second in command. And not just second in command, God would then use Joseph to provide food for the entire region during a very severe famine. And included among those individuals that Joseph provided food for were Joseph's family and his friends who sold him into slavery. His brothers who sold him into slavery. And here's what Joseph says to his brothers at the end of all this, which I think captures the entire focus of the week. Genesis 50, verses 19 and 20. But Joseph said to them, "Don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. So then don't be afraid. I will provide for you and your children." He reassured them and spoke kindly to them. Another way to say this is that even in trying circumstances, God is actively involved in working around us and in us to accomplish his mission. And Joseph is just another example of that. And it's a great biblical illustration of this truth. Now, I want to suggest to you that not only was this true back in the Bible, but it's true today. And I don't just want to give you an illustration back in the Bible. I want to actually give you an illustration that's true today. And so Pat Moynihan's going to come up. Pat teaches and leads one of our small groups. And Pat's got a great life story about how God is always at work in us and around us, even in some difficult situations. So Pat's going to come up and share. He's going to then pray, and we're going to sing one more song, and we'll be done. And so, Pat, thanks for sharing. I hope you'll be encouraged by this.
Good morning. I'm the poster boy for all those weaknesses that Brother Neal listed at the beginning of his presentation. But I have had an experience recently. I've had many in my life, but I've had an experience recently to see God working in and around us, including myself. Several years ago, a friend of mine who attends services at Mount Zion location invited me to join him one weekend in a prison ministry. Ministry is called Bill Glass Behind the Walls. It was started by a Hall of Fame football player for the Cleveland Browns, who was led to Jesus by Billy Graham. The most recent opportunity to participate was March 13th and 14th. You go up on a Friday, you go to the location on Friday, you meet and have a meal, a fellowship with other teammates, volunteers as they call them, to plan and talk about the rules in the prison and all the night before, and to pray for God to open the minds and hearts of inmates and to prepare us to go ahead. So you have to spend the night in a hotel room. I booked a hotel room in Dayton. This is Dayton at the Montgomery County Jail. We booked a room at the hotel. My friend, we often go together, was going as well. But I've been having some serious back pain. You saw me limp up here. Some serious back pain. I can't sit very well. That's why I'm standing in the back. I can't sleep well because I can't lay down. Spinal stenosis and not getting any better. But I thought, I'm okay. My friend's going to be there with me. He can help me through it. 2 days before, he let me know that he wasn't going to be able to attend because he had another commitment that he couldn't get out of. So here it is, 2 days before. I'm on my own. I still got time to cancel the hotel room. So I'm telling my wife, well, maybe God's telling me, as bad as you're hurting, maybe you don't need to go to this one. And that little voice, God talking to you, said, I didn't ask you to go if you felt okay. I just asked you to go. So I went and said, okay, I'll take some pillows with me and rearrange in a hotel bed. Oh, good luck with that. Hotel bed, and I'll be all right. I was not all right. Pain was terrible. I had great difficulty sleeping. I slept less than awake, asleep, arranged pillows, slept less than 3 hours, got up. We have to be there at 6 in the morning. Got up to head to the prison feeling terrible. I took my blood pressure, and my blood pressure was 183 over 85. That's not good. And I thought, I can't do this. I might die. But what better place to die? So I went to the prison, again, feeling terrible. I don't think I can get through this. I don't think I can do this. So we go to the first cell block, about 30 volunteers or teammates, as we call them. There's a presentation and testimony by a performer of one kind or another. This guy bent horseshoes into hearts. And then he invites the inmates to talk to one of the teammates. And we have a script that we go through, asking them questions and then sharing the gospel with him. No sooner does the guy finish his presentation and say, now I want each of you to pair up with the teammate, till the guy sitting about as far from me to her motioned to me to come over. So I sat down with him, asked if I could share the gospel with him, and he says, yes, my mentor, I don't know what his problem, why he was in jail, but my mentor has been telling me about Jesus, and I want to know more. I shared the gospel with him. At the end of our script that we go through with them, you ask them if they want to accept Christ, and if the answer is yes, you invite them to read a prayer, the sinner's prayer, and accept Christ. And he said yes, so he accepted Christ in that cell block. As we're waiting for the next opportunity to go to 3 different cell blocks. Sometimes you do it in the yard, but 3 different cell blocks. As we're waiting to go to the second one, another man that I had met but didn't know well came over and said they're looking for 4 or 5 guys to go into segregation. Segregation is also called isolation. That's where they put the inmates that have misbehaved and they don't trust them to be around other people. So I said, sure. So we go to isolation. They tell us at isolation, you can't go to that cell over there because he's crazy. He runs around naked all day just screaming. Some of them are misbehaved. Some of them are mentally ill. But at any rate, we usually talk, if you go into isolation or segregation, you talk to them through the door. In this case, however, there were some that they were going to let out of their cells for lunch. So I'm heading to one of the cells, one of the closed doors, to speak to the door to someone, and a gentleman on the second row, they're circular, 2 levels, a balcony around him, standing on the balcony. He was getting ready to come down to dinner or lunch, said, hey, are you a minister? And I said, no, I'm a minister. Well, what are you doing here? And I told him I had come to share Jesus. And he's trying to talk to me from the balcony. I forgot my hearing aids, and I'm not hearing much of anything. I'm getting about every 4th word. And I keep asking him, what do you say, what do you say? And so he says, I'll come down and talk to you. So he came down. We sat at the table. He shared with me that he didn't grow up in church. His grandmother told him a lot of stories. He knew about Job. He knew about David, and was impressed by them, but didn't have those stories exactly right. But at any rate, we talked about that. We talked about his situation, and he began to light up. And we got to the sinner's prayer, and I said, ask him if he wanted to read the sinner's prayer with me. We typically ask him, would you like to read the sinner's prayer or say the sinner's prayer with me as I read it? And he said yes, and started to read it on his own without any prompting. And when he got to the part about confessing his sins, he began to confess his sins specifically. What he did, why he was in isolation, because of anger issues, etc. And he accepted Christ. Now look what I had missed. Look at what I would have missed if I had not gone. And that's God working in us. That's God working in us despite our weaknesses. That's God working in us, even when we're not sure what he's doing. In fact, we're very skeptical about what he's doing. So I'm here to testify that God works in us, whether we're engaged or not, whether we're paying attention or not. if you just go. If you just go. If you look for those opportunities and take advantage of them. And you see, I get emotional about it every time, because if you ever go to one of those prison ministries, even if no one accepts Christ, and that's happened a few times, you come home exhausted but exhilarated because of the joy of Christ. And what you see happen just inspires you. I drove home that day, and I guess I was hurting, but I don't remember it. I felt good, as my wife can tell you. I'm bouncing off the walls, sharing with her what happened. So let me close with a word of prayer here.